Hey everyone, Tactics here, and today we've got an exciting Mythic Plus post here where Blizzard has given us some insight into how affixes are going to change in the War Within, as well as confirming the Season 1 dungeon set, as well as some other difficulty changes for normal, heroic, and mythic for anyone not familiar with any of the changes that happened in Season 4. So let's just hop right into this. So off the top here, normal is going to be the same. Right off the bat, through leveling, there's going to be, I believe, 4 level up dungeons in War Within and 4 max level dungeons. There's also going to be heroic difficulty, which is a bit different now for anyone that didn't play Season 4, which is now equivalent basically to difficulty of Mythic 0 in the previous system. It's going to be the same as it was in Season 4 if you have been playing Season 4. It's also going to be queuable. It appears that it's not going to be queuable in the first 2 weeks. Maybe you have to actually walk to the dungeon. Maybe it's just a bug on beta. Still not 100% sure how that works. And apparently, starting with Season 1, the heroic dungeon roster is actually going to be the Mythic Plus seasonal roster. So this is going to change from season to season, which is kind of cool. The wording is a bit odd here. I'm not sure, again, if heroic dungeons are available in the first 2 weeks. Is that going to be all the War Within dungeons because Season 1 hasn't started yet? Are heroics not going to be available the first 2 weeks? Still a little unclear, so maybe we can get some clarification on that. Then we move to Mythic 0 dungeons. These are, again, tuned to be equivalent to the old plus 10 dungeons if you're playing before Season 4 of Dragonflight. If you're playing Season 4 of Dragonflight, these are the same as they are in that season. There's no timers, there's no affixes, no anything like that, so you get to go through the dungeon, get pretty decent rewards, and not need to worry about a timer or an affix, that kind of thing, right? Same deal here as Heroic, where the Mythic dungeon pool, the Mythic 0 pool, sorry, it's going to be the same as the Mythic Plus pool. So you're going to get a new Mythic 0 pool every season, which is kind of cool. And these are going to be unavailable until the season begins. So actually, with this note here, that kind of makes me think heroics will be available in the first 2 weeks. But again, unsure what the dungeon pool and those are going to be like. And these are now moving to a daily lockout. So you'll be able to do one Mythic 0 a day, or each Mythic 0, sorry, a day, as opposed to it once per week per Mythic 0. So a little bit more content for players to do if Mythic 0 is kind of where you're getting a lot of your powerful gear. But again, it's not going to be likely something you spam in the first week, as it is going to be Heroic Week. Maybe Mythic Plus is going to be available week 1. Still don't know exactly what that's going to look like, so have to wait and see. Speaking of Mythic Plus, the 8 dungeons that we, I think, Wowhead data mined earlier is confirmed. So this is your dungeon pool for Season 1. Grimbatoll, I'm going to reserve judgment. It's such an old dungeon. It's going to get completely reworked. Necrotic Wake, they're going to have to do something about weapons and the Goliaths in there. Last boss, notably, also was very, very difficult and long. So we'll be interesting to see how they tune that. Similarly, for Mist of Tyrannus Scythe, will be interesting to see how they tune the first boss, because that was the most problematic boss, and maybe just pathing through the maze, potentially making that either more consistent or quicker, allowing you to do bigger pulls. Siege of Borealis is also going to need, a few more changes. The spotter stuff, obviously, was kind of rough. The last boss was super annoying. Problematic scaling on Tyrannical and that kind of thing. So we'll be interested to see how they handle this. I don't think these 3 dungeons are necessarily going to be bad, especially because I think they're pretty good dungeons if there's some small changes that are made. So I'm not super down about this season, but those changes do need to happen. Speaking of the new Mythic Plus system, there is going to be a new set of affixes here. So what they've done is all the +4 affixes have been removed, and they are adding in some new ones, and that is the new +4. So again, the new Mythic Plus system, for anyone that didn't play in Season 4 of Dragonflight, is now basically a +2 is equivalent to the old +11. And then it just goes up from there. So where you get your portals is now +10, and that is equivalent to the old +20. So that's how that works. Now, scrolling down here, let's look at the affixes themselves and talk about the goals that Blizzard has posted. So they basically focusing on the following objectives here. So they want to shift the source of the challenge to the dungeon itself by simplifying affix design and emphasizing creature abilities. They want to reduce visual noise, nameplate clutter, and the cognitive load on players during trash combat, and they want to allow for varied and context-specific gameplay decisions depending on the dungeon they are applied to. I don't have a problem with these goals. These goals sound good. But let's actually get into the affixes themselves here. Well, actually, let's continue reading. So these affixes are also going to include a positive effect. The aim of these effects is to highlight different damage types each week, allowing each specialization additional opportunities to excel. These effects should feel like a bonus, offering an advantage for different damage profiles each week without being essential to complete a dungeon, and players will have the opportunity to flex towards different talents or gearing options and consumables to capitalize on the effects. Again, good in theory. The actual application I don't really like. So these are the new affixes. Reckless. Non-boss enemies without mana will ignore 20% armor with their attacks, but their own armor is reduced by 30% and they take 10% increased arcane damage. Thorned. Non-boss enemies without mana inflict physical damage to their attackers when attacked, but they take 10% increased holy and shadow damage. Attuned. Non-boss enemies with mana inflict 20% increased magic damage, but take 10% increased nature damage and 30% increased damage from bleeds. And then focused. Non-boss enemies with mana again have 30% increased haste, but take 10% increased frost and fire damage. Now, to me, these effects just scream we ran out of ideas, especially because in 3 out of the 4 cases here, right, in the ignores 20% of your armor, 20% increased magic damage, and 30% increased haste on certain specific mobs in dungeon, these majorly will affect tank players, and almost exclusively tank players. And obviously there will be some AoE attacks or random target attacks, where in this case this will affect other players as well, but the vast majority of the damage intake in a lot of these scenarios is going to be coming into the tank, and this is just going to be another thing tanks need to deal with, especially because if you look at the affixes that were removed here, it's Afflicted, Incorporeal, Entangling, Storming, and Volcanic, and Spiteful. Those are the 6 that were removed, and staying here on the 7 row are Raging, Bolstering, Bursting, Sanguine. And we don't know the state of Tyrannical and Fortified. They're testing it. They're not sure. But especially on fortified weeks, because this is only buffing non-boss enemies, right? It's not going to buff bosses. On fortified weeks, you're amping the damage of mobs, and then you also add into effect things like bolstering, where mobs then again are gaining a damage amp. And these damage amps together are going to scale. Or raging, where you have these casters that are spam casting on a tank or even random players, and then they become CC immune, and all you can do is interrupt, but you have a finite number of interrupts. And then, you know, your tank's also taking a bunch of extra magic damage now because you can't stop these mobs from casting, right? I think the interactions here are exceptionally problematic. And I think if I, had to make a suggestion, it's delete these affixes and not these ones. Because, again, these just... Obviously, Bursting and Sanguine, I mean, they're probably, again, you're not going to have those insane, extremely negative interactions, but Raging and Bolstering certainly have a ton of negative interactions with also, increasing the damage output of specific mobs, and I think that's very, very problematic and excessively problematic for tank players, which is already an underrepresented role. I don't think this is the way to go about it. And then you look at the positives, and it's just really uninspired, flat damage increases to certain damage schools, and I don't see how buffing arcane damage by 10% offers an advantage for different damage profiles on a week-to-week basis. That doesn't make sense to me, because it's not a damage pro. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm misunderstanding here, but it's like reducing armor by 30%, arcane damage by 10%. Okay, but I don't any of specs like Havoc Demon Hunter, right, or Vengeance Demon Hunter, where chaos damage applies to all magic schools, and there's plenty of magic schools that are multiple different schools of damage, so then those specs just have an advantage over the specs that don't. For example, right, if you're, I don't know, you're like a fire mage, all you're doing is fire damage, so on a bunch of these weeks you don't get a bonus. You get your bonus on this week, but then again you have a Demon Hunter and they get a bonus damage on every week, right? So it's a bit odd to me. I feel like this is when people ask for Kiss Curse affixes, I don't think they were asking for just flat boosts to the mob and flat boosts to you. And I do understand that this is going to, it's not a new thing you have to look out for, but if you're talking cognitive load on a tank player, for example, losing just flat 20% of your armor against certain mobs is certainly more cognitive load required on those pulls than dealing with Entangling, dealing with Storming, dealing with Volcanic, right? Those are just less cognitive load used than this flat thing. This may be more boring. This may seem like it should be less cognitive load, but you losing 20% of your armor against certain mobs is a massive damage intake for a lot of tank specs, right? It's just, I don't know. I don't see the benefit here. And to be fair, right, most of the changes and stuff in this post is good, for sure, totally. But I think this just totally dropped the ball. And I really, really was hoping we wouldn't have to deal with another expansion of Bolstering and Sanguine. Bolstering in particular, and I think Raging are actually more problematic than Sanguine. Sanguine's just extremely annoying and adds time. But, there's a lot more outplay, I think, for Sanguine than bolstering and raging, especially raging when there's only one single class in the game that has an AoE soothe. It's going to be exceptionally problematic if it overlaps with like any of these two affixes here. Well, you know, again, we'll be doing Mythic Plus testing when this comes out, but I think there are a ton of problems with these new affixes, and I hope they reconsider either how these affixes function or what affixes they're going to be removing, because definitely this is less problematic if it's paired with any of these affixes here, but that doesn't mean there isn't still problems with it, right? So we'll see how it actually feels during testing. We'll see if they end up keeping Tyrant and Fortified, because like I said, Fortified amps all these up by a lot too, right? So we'll have to see, but so far, a bunch of positive stuff, but also some negative stuff on the affix side, in my opinion. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below, and remember, make sure to be subscribed to the channel. We've got a ton of War Within content coming regarding tank specs, regarding dungeons, regarding raids, so be sure to turn on notifications so you know when that gets posted. Shout out to my amazing Patreons for all of their support, and I'll see everyone in the next video.